I had never known silence could feel so heavy, not the peaceful silence of dawn on the prairie. When the sun burns gold across the horizon and the meadowlarks stir the air with their song. No, this was the kind of silence that pressed down on a soul like a coffin lid, smothering every breath until it tasted of dust and grief. 3 weeks had passed since Matthew, my husband, my sheriff, my partner in name, if not always in heart, was lowered into the red earth behind the churchyard. And yet the hush of Cedar Hollow hadn't lifted. Folks still spoke in whispers when they saw me, their eyes darting like mice toward the street, toward the courthouse, toward the scarred man standing in the shadows. I am Eliza Callahan, widow of the late Sheriff Matthew Callahan. It feels strange to say that word widow, as though naming it might call down some judgment from the Almighty. My hands still search for his coat on the peg, my ears for the sound of his boots on the porch, though both will remain forever empty. And yet grief is not the only weight I bear. There is fear too, and shame, and the gnawing truth that I am caught in a snare set not by bandits or Comanche, but by the very men sworn to uphold law in this brittle town. It began on the morning Judge Silas Hargrave sent for me. I remember pulling my shawl tight against the wind, walking up the courthouse steps while folks paused in their errands to stare. Mrs. Agnes Holt, whose tongue could slice hide from a steer, whispered something sharp to her companion. Mr. Pike. The feed store owner removed his hat as I passed, but his eyes flickered toward the broad shape leaning against the hitching post. Jonah Kane, the man folks called a killer behind closed doors. His scar caught the morning light, a ragged mark from ear to jaw, and I felt a chill not from the wind, but from the way he stood so still, as if carved from the same stone as the courthouse itself. Inside, Judge Hargrave wasted little time with condolences. His hands were folded atop a ledger, his lips pursed in disapproval before I had even sat down. Mrs. Callahan, he began, though I heard the faint curl of disdain in the way he said my name, as if widowhood made me smaller in his eyes. The council has reviewed the matter of your property. As you are aware, our statutes do not permit a woman to own or manage land without proper male oversight. My husband is dead, I said, forcing my voice to remain steady. The Callahan Ranch is mine by right, by sentiment. Perhaps Hargrave corrected, his jowls trembling as he leaned forward. But not by law. You will require a guardian, a husband. The council allows you 1 month to remarry if you wish to retain your estate. The words struck like a lash. I remember gripping the edge of my chair until my knuckles turned white. And if I refuse, then the ranch will be forfeit to the county. Naturally, we shall ensure fair redistribution. His smile was thin as a blade. Behind him, Mayor Ellison shifted his weight, avoiding my eyes. I saw the calculation their railroad men were already sniffing along our valley, hungry for land and water rights. My ranch was worth more than my freedom. It was then he mentioned Jonah Kane. By the late sheriff's will, a parcel of 40 acres adjoining your property was left to Kane, Hargrave said. He is already tied to your estate. The council deems it fitting you join in marriage. Thus the land remains in steady hands. The silence in that room was so deep, I could hear my own heartbeat. Jonah Kane, an outlaw turned ranch hand scarred by violence. A man who spoke little but carried a reputation darker than midnight. Matthew had taken him in, yes, though I never understood why. The town whispered about killings in Texas, about blood spilled for coin, and now they would bind me to him as though I were a calf on auction. I will not, I whispered. I can manage alone. Hargrave's chuckle was low and cruel. Improper for a woman to speak so. You are not meant for such burdens. Anger surged hot in my chest, hotter than grief had ever burned. I wanted to shout, to throw the ledger from his desk, to tear down every wall that boxed me into this life. But I sat silent, because in Cedar Hollow, a woman's fury was just another cause for gossip, another reason to call her unfit. So I pressed my nails into my palms until the skin broke, and I said nothing. When I emerged into the daylight, Jonah Kane was still there. He pushed away from the post, his broad frame casting a long shadow across the steps. His eyes gray as storm clouds met mine with a stillness that unsettled me more than Judge Hargrave's decree. I could not read them. Pity, perhaps, or something harder, like resignation. He tipped his hat, but spoke no word. And in that silence, I felt the trap spring shut. That evening the town gathered at the church, as they always did when tragedy or scandal brewed. Reverend Abel raised his voice in prayer, but the whispers drowned him out. The widow too eager, hissed Mrs. Holt. The gunslinger, too dangerous, muttered another. Their eyes slid to me like knives. I sat with my chin high, though every whisper cut deeper than the last. When the hymn ended, I could barely force the words from my throat. It was then I first noticed how Jonah filled a doorway broad-shouldered. Quiet, a man who bore the room's suspicion without flinching. His scarred face caught the lamplight, making him seem carved from some darker fate. He stood apart, yet somehow everything gravitated toward him. I hated the way my pulse quickened when his gaze brushed mine. Hated the way the air itself seemed to tighten. In the days that followed, talk of our forced union spread like prairie fire. Folks came under the pretense of offering pies or condolences, but what they wanted was to peer inside my parlor, to see if the scarred man had already made his claim. I told them all the same. Jonah and I were bound only in law, not in heart. Separate rooms, separate lives. A business arrangement, nothing more. They smiled politely, but when they turned, I saw the shake of their heads. Already the story was being written without me. It was not Jonah who frightened me most, though. It was the quietness in his acceptance. He said yes without argument, without plea, as if he had already expected this fate. When I asked him why, the only answer he gave was, I owed Matthew. He would say no more. I could not tell if it was loyalty or guilt that bound him to me, and so the days stretched on, each one carrying me closer to the day the preacher would bind me again with vows I did not want. Nights were lonelier still. I would stand on the porch, the prairie wind tugging at my hair, staring at the dark silhouette of Jonah's small cabin on the adjoining acres. A single lamp glowed there, steady and silent. Sometimes I wondered if he sat awake as I did, listening to the coyotes cry, wondering how two broken souls could be yoked together by law and expectation. But beneath that wondering was something else, something dangerous. For though I told myself I despised the council, despised the trap, despised Jonah's silence most of all, there was a part of me that remembered the way he had looked at me outside the courthouse, not with pity, not with disdain, but with a kind of steadiness I had not felt in years. And that steadiness lodged in me like a splinter I could not draw out. It was on a Sunday evening, after church, that the whispers sharpened into open judgment. I had lingered near the steps, speaking to Margaret Wells, the schoolteacher, one of the few women in town who treated me as more than a scandal. She spoke kindly of Matthew, of the way he once donated books for her students. But her eyes softened when she added, Eliza, you don't have to let their tongues define you. Folks will always talk. Before I could reply, Mrs. Holt's voice rang clear as a bell. A widow remarrying so soon. It does make one wonder, doesn't it? Her companion tittered, and heads turned like wheat in the wind. Heat rushed to my face. I wanted to lash out, but Margaret's hand on my arm steadied me. Across the yard, Jonah leaned against the fence, his hat brim shadowing his scar. He said nothing, but I knew he heard. The muscle in his jaw tightened, and for the first time, I wondered what fury brewed beneath that silence, that night. When I returned home, I found a bundle of kindling stacked neatly by my door, though I had not left it there. The fire was dying on the hearth, the house cold. I gathered the wood, struck a spark, and as the flames caught, I thought of Jonah's scarred hands, rough from labor, leaving gifts without acknowledgement. And though I told myself it was only neighborly, something stirred in my chest that I could not name. The days that followed blurred together, each one pulling me deeper into a storm I had not chosen. The council's decree, the town's whispers, the scarred man's silence, they were threads tightening around me. And though I swore to myself I would never bend, never yield, I could feel the ground shifting beneath my feet, as though fate itself was steering me toward a place I did not yet see. If you asked me then what I feared most, I would have said losing the ranch. Losing my independence, losing the name Callahan. But now, looking back, I know the truth. What I feared most was the way Jonah Kane's gray eyes followed me, steady as a promise, unspoken as a prayer. Because in that silence, I felt something stir that terrified me more than any outlaw, any judge, any whisper in the pews. The first flicker of longing, and longing, I had learned, was more dangerous than grief. Longing could burn a woman alive. The first time I saw Wade Maddox again, I felt the past tighten around Jonah like a noose. He rode into Cedar Hollow with dust on his hat and a grin as wide as a rattlesnake's coil. The sort of grin that told you he already knew the cards in your hand. Folks scattered as he dismounted in front of the saloon. But I remained on the boardwalk, groceries clutched against my chest, my pulse quickening as Jonah's body went rigid beside me. He said nothing, though his hand hovered near his hip the way a wolf pricks its ears at the sound of a rival. I had known Jonah carried shadows, but in that moment, those shadows seemed to darken the entire street. Eliza Callahan, Wade drawled, his voice dripping with familiarity, though I had never met him before. Or should I say, Mrs. Kane? His eyes flicked to Jonah, mocking, and I felt the heat rise in my cheeks. Jonah's jaw tightened, but still he said nothing. That silence of his was sometimes a shield, sometimes a prison. I could not yet tell which it was now. Wade tipped his hat to me, then leaned just close enough that I caught the scent of whiskey and dust. Your man here owes me. From Laredo. Debt unpaid. He turned back toward Jonah, his grin sharpening. Funny thing about debts, Kane. They got a way of cumin due. Even in quiet little towns like this, I wanted to demand what he meant, but Jonah's hand brushed my arm, a warning. Not here, he muttered. His eyes never left Wade, though the tension in them spoke louder than any words. That night, after supper, Jonah finally told me. His voice was low, like a confession to the fire itself rather than to me. We rode together once, he said, staring at the flames. Me and Wade robbed banks, stages, did worse. Laredo was the last time went bad. People died. He didn't say more, but his silence filled the room like smoke. I thought of the scar running down his face, the quiet weight he carried every day, and realized this Wade Maddox wasn't just a ghost from his past. He was the past itself. Returned with teeth. 2 days later, a letter arrived. Folded crisp, slid under our door. Jonah opened it with a knife, and I read the words over his shoulder. I know what really happened to your sheriff. Meet me at the old mill if you want the truth. Come alone, Kane, or her land burns. There was no signature, but the script was Wade's swagger-made ink. My stomach twisted. He wasn't only threatening Jonah now, he was dragging Matthew's death into his snare. I sat at the table, the letter trembling in my hands. He's lying, I whispered, though doubt gnawed at me. Matthew had enemies, yes, but what if Wade truly knew something more? He wants to draw you out. It's a trap. Jonah's gaze flicked to me, storm gray and steady. It's always a trap. Question is whether we spring it on our terms or his. He folded the letter, tucked it into his vest. If I go, he might leave you be. The thought of Jonah riding away, leaving me alone with Caleb, made my chest constrict. No, I said. This isn't only your fight anymore. He mentioned Matthew. That means it's mine too. Jonah's expression hardened, as if bracing himself against something heavier than bullets. Eliza, no. I cut him off. I won't sit by my fire while you walk into danger meant for us both. That man threatened my land, my home, my family. I'll not let him take more from me than he already has. The word family slipped out before I could stop it, but Jonah heard. His eyes softened just for a moment, though his voice remained steady. Then we go together. And so it was settled. We saddled the horses under a waning moon, Caleb begging to come with us, until Jonah knelt and told him firmly no. The boy's lip trembled, but his eyes wide and fierce reminded me too much of Matthew's in his younger days. I promised Caleb we'd be back by dawn. He didn't believe me, not fully. and neither did I. The mill stood abandoned on the edge of the river, its wheel long broken, its timbers groaning in the night wind. We approached slow, the air thick with that charged stillness that comes before a storm. My palms were slick against the rifle I carried, though I'd only fired at coyotes before. Jonah's shadow stretched tall beside me, his revolver steady as if it were part of his very hand. He moved with the calm of a man who had danced with death too many times to flinch at the music. We didn't have to wait long. Wade's men emerged from the dark like wolves, circling a campfire half a dozen shapes, guns glinting. And then Wade himself stepped forward, smile wide, eyes alight with cruelty. "Brought your missus, I see. Brave or foolish, can't tell which. Say your piece," Jonah said, voice flat. Wade's grin widened. "Your sheriff wasn't killed by outlaws. He was sniffing around Judge Hargrave's dealings with the railroad. Got too close. Brennan and Ellison knew it. They let the Wallace gang take him out, tied it up neat as a hangman's knot. And you, Kane, you're fool enough to guard the widow of the man they buried." My breath caught. Could it be true? I had suspected Matthew's death wasn't clean, but to hear it laid out so bold and cruel rage flared hot in me. "You lie," I spat, but my voice shook. "Believe what you want, darlin'," Wade sneered. "Truth don't change. Now, can your debt? Pay it with your life, and maybe I let the widow and her ranch alone." It was then the first shot rang out. Chaos erupted, muzzle flashes tearing the night. Jonah shoved me behind a timber, his revolver barking in deadly rhythm. I saw him move with terrifying precision, each shot filling a man, his body shifting like water around stone. But there were too many. The mill filled with smoke and thunder. A bullet splintered the beam beside my head, and instinct took over. I raised the rifle, sighted down the barrel, and squeezed. The recoil slammed my shoulder, but I saw a man drop, heard Jonah's grunt of approval through the din. Then a shout split the night Caleb's voice. My blood turned cold. The boy had followed us, crouched in the shadows. One of Wade's men lunged for him, and without thinking, Caleb hurled a rock square at the outlaw's head. The man staggered just long enough for Jonah's bullet to find his chest. Caleb froze, trembling but alive. "Run, boy," Jonah roared, though his eyes flashed with something close to pride. Caleb scrambled to cover behind me, clinging to my skirts as if they could shield him from the world's bullets. At last it came down to Wade and Jonah, circling each other in the smoke. Their past hung heavy between them, every sign, every drop of blood. Wade's grin was gone now, his eyes sharp and deadly. "You can't outrun what you are, Kane," he snarled. "Killer, outlaw, always were, always will be." Jonah's face was carved from stone. "Maybe so. But tonight it ends with you." They drew in the same breath, guns flashing almost as one. Wade staggered, shock etched across his face, then crumpled to the dust. His last words rasped out, poisoned to the end. "A killer. Can't be anything else." Jonah stood over him, chest heaving, smoke curling from his revolver. The silence that followed was deafening, broken only by Caleb's ragged sobs. I touched Jonah's arm, felt the tremor in him, though his face gave nothing away. But I knew the words had struck deep. Wade had died, but his poison lingered. Marshal Deke arrived with men at dawn, surveying the bodies with a practiced eye. "Wallace men," he declared, though I heard the hollowness in it. "Convenient scapegoats." Jonah and I shared a look. We both knew corruption ran deeper. That Wade's tale of Hargrave and the railroad was more than drunken boasting, but proving it would be near impossible. The marshal handed us papers for the reward money, a sum large enough to secure the ranch, to buy new cattle, to ease the constant worry of survival. It should have felt like victory. Instead, it felt like Ashdod back in town. Whispers swirled again. Some said Jonah had saved us. Others said he had brought danger to our door. At church that Sunday, the eyes of the town weighed heavier than any sermon. I sat rigid in the pew, but when Jonah rose to speak, the room held its breath. He stood tall, scar and all, and spoke plain. "I've killed men. Some deserved it, some maybe didn't. I can't wash that blood away. But I stand before you now to say I'm done running from it. I'll make a life here, with my wife, with the boy. You can take it or leave it. A murmur rippled through the congregation, half scandal, half awe. And then I stood, heart pounding, and took Jonah's hand in mine. He is my husband, I said, my voice ringing clear. This marriage is no arrangement. It is real, earned in fire and blood. I will not bow to whispers. This is my family. My hand trembled in his, but Jonah's grip steadied me. For the first time since Matthew's death, felt strong. Some looked away in shame. Dr. Garrett nodded. Mrs. Morrison dabbed her eyes. Others still whispered, but their words no longer pierced as sharply. Caleb, seated between us, reached up and tugged at Jonah's sleeve. "Pa," he said, voice small but sure. Jonah stiffened, then bent, his scarred face softening as he laid a hand on the boy's shoulder. It was the first time I saw his silence break into something close to peace, that night. By the hearth, Jonah read aloud from Matthew's old Bible. Stumbling over words but pressing on, Caleb's head resting against my arm. The firelight softened Jonah's scars, turning them into something almost holy, reminders not only of pain but of survival. I thought of Wade's words that a killer can never change. Jan knew in my bones they were wrong. For in that quiet moment, with the boy's soft breath and Jonah's rough voice filling the room, I saw the truth. We were no longer fragments of broken lives. We were becoming whole. Later, Jonah saddled the horses, and we rode under starlight, the prairie stretching endless before us. The wind carried the scent of sage, the sky alight with constellations older than any law. He spoke at last, his voice low. "I don't deserve this, the boy, but I'll fight for it." Every day, I reached across the saddle gap, touched his scar with trembling fingers. "We all got scars, Jonah. Some just show on the outside." His breath hitched. And for the first time, he kissed me not with desperation, but with hope. Days later, Judge Hargrave himself rode out, threatening to strip our land through forged deeds. He underestimated me. Margaret Wells, quiet as a mouse most days, produced documents exposing his fraud, his ties to the railroad. The council's grip cracked, though prejudice lingered in whispers and sidelong glances. Yet their power to take what was ours had broken. In the end, it was not law or bullets that saved us, but connection pains shared, burdens shouldered together. Jonah, once a silent shadow, now stood beside me, his hand firm in mine. Caleb, once orphaned, now called us Ma and Pa with pride. The town might never fully forgive, but forgiveness was not what we sought. We sought life. We sought love. And we found it carved from ash and flame, on the ridge above the ranch. The sun setting in a blaze of crimson, I leaned against Jonah's chest, his arms strong around me. Caleb rode ahead, whooping into the wind, his laughter rising free. Our scars remained, yes, but they no longer bound us to the past. They marked the path we had walked to reach this place. A family forged in loss, tempered in fire, bound not by law or whispers, but by choice, by love. And for the first time since Matthew's death, I let the silence of the prairie wash over me, not heavy, not suffocating, but alive with promise.